All right, we're going to get started this week into, besides the tenderloin, filet mignon, your highest price cuts of meat on the beef animal. This is the rib area, rib wholesale, and the reason why the rib wholesale is the highest price cut and the best, some of the best cuts is because it's taken from the rib area. So therefore, the muscles in here, which are around in this area right here, are not going to move at all. The rib cage doesn't flex, it doesn't get used for movement, and therefore it's extremely tender. Now, one thing you will see about the rib cuts is that there is also a lot of waste, and that waste is coming from not those calories, those fat calories not being used and being stored in that area, and so you get a lot more fat, but you do get a lot of marbling. When we look at a carcass that's hanging on the rail to see how good the marbling is, they're actually going to cut that carcass open about right here, and they're going to look at the marbling and give it a grade. And the grades, I don't know if you remember, but like the standard, the select, the choice, and the prime. And so that's what we're looking for in that area when we cut the carcass open. So to start with the rib, obviously one of the main things that people know about is the prime rib. We talked about this in class, how prime rib is basically a rib roast. It's not actually prime, although that is how it started, was the prime cut of the meat, and it was graded prime. But you're going to see that some of these cuts are going to be characterized by a portion of the rib bone being cut and left off. Okay, it's become kind of a popular thing nowadays to leave these bones sticking out of steaks and roasts. Just a aesthetic value, cosmetic, I guess you could say. So our first one we're going to take is a rib roast. And rib roast, the number one thing you're going to look for, it's going to be characterized by having a rib bone. Now that rib bone is curved, therefore when you see this piece of meat, it's going to have a curve to it at the bottom. If this was boneless rib roast, that meat would sit flat. It's kind of like the arch of your foot. Okay? Some people have a big arch, and that's like bone-in rib roast. Some people have a really flat foot, and the whole bottom of their foot touches. That's going to be like a rib roast, boneless. Okay. We also have what we call a muscle attachment, a muscle that's shaped like a rabbit. And this is something you have to use your imagination on, but I was taught this clear back when I was in high school. And there's a rabbit muscle. And I don't know if you guys can see it without me pointing it out, but it's kind of laying down this direction. And so you have its head right here. Here's its ear that comes back. And here's its body. And so use your imagination, you might find that. Rib roast, do you have to know that, buddy? No, because you're going to see the rib bone. Okay, here's a different angle of the rib bone. You can see rib roast typically going to be anywhere between 2 and 5 ribs, but you can order larger ones. Okay, here's our rabbit. Hard to see at this angle, but the one thing you can just about always pick out is that bunny ear on the backside. Here's its body, here's its distorted head, and I think maybe it's dead because its tongue is hanging out right there. Okay, so then we go to a rib eye roast, boneless. And sometimes this roast is difficult for people to identify because it looks similar to maybe a portion of the tenderloin roast. It doesn't necessarily taper. It's a lot bigger. In real life, this is about 4 to 5 times bigger around than a tenderloin roast. And then the other thing is, okay, well, it's flat because that rib bone has been taken out of there. So therefore, it's got no arches in its meat anymore, and so it just sits flat like a piece of meat would. And so, again, the one thing we want to identify, the easiest thing to pick out, is this rabbit ear right here. That's the ear. There's the body. Here's its head, and I think that's its little carrot nose. Not much you can see on this rib eye roast boneless, except for it gives you a bigger view of the side. One thing you always have in these rib eye cuts, the rib cuts, the steaks and roast, is a pretty good layer of fat inside. So if we go back here, okay, we got a layer of fat in here that's pretty good. A layer of fat that's in there. And again, layer of fat. All right, so that's something to look for. And we're going to get into the ribeye steak. Okay, and one thing we have to be able to tell the difference is between a lip on or a regular ribeye steak. So this is a regular ribeye steak, boneless. Okay, this is going to be a ribeye steak lip on. And if you haven't noticed the difference yet, okay, this is what they are going to be calling the lip muscle. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That looks more like a tail muscle to me, because if you find the bunny, there's its ear. Here's its, okay, it's on the tail side, but it's called a lip. This one, the lip has been cut off. Okay, with the lip, you do get a lot of fat, and so I guess if you're buying in a grocery store, you have a decision to make. Do I buy it for that little piece of muscle there, but I'm paying for this extra weight of fat, or do I buy it no lip to where I'm not getting that waste? Okay, so this is a ribeye steak lip on. This one actually still has a bone in it. It can be either way, bone in or bone out. Okay, here's your main ribeye muscle. Okay, and there is your lip right there. Okay. This is actually an extremely, it's called the cover muscle. Okay, some people call it the cover muscle. It's got a name. I don't remember right offhand, but that is an extremely tender piece of meat, and you can just pull that off with your fork. Here we got another ribeye steak lip on. There's our lip. This one has a bone in it still. Okay, here's our bunny. Here's its ear. Here's its head. Here's its body. So that's something you look for in a ribeye. Okay, now we got a ribeye steak boneless. Okay, well, first of all, it's boneless. We don't have a bone, and the only ribeye steak we have other than that is the lip on. So then what you look at, okay, is there a lip on here? Nope, there's no lip on here. Okay, can you see the bunny? This bunny actually to me looks like it's kind of standing up. Here's its ear, here's its head, here's its body, and it's like Thumper. Here's its little tail sticking out. Ribeye steak boneless, okay, you see where the bone was cut out. You can pick out the ear. The rest of this body on this one's kind of distorted. Okay, something let's look at right quick is marbling. When we look at this rib roast here, we don't have a whole lot of marbling. You see little tiny white specks. That's probably a select cut. Okay, we're getting in a little more marbling here. It's probably a choice cut right there. You're going to hear quite a bit of marbling. That's a high choice, maybe even a low prime cut. This you don't have much. There's not very many specs in here. You're looking at a low select, possibly even standard on that. And we look at these, not much marbling in these cuts. I mean, basically, if you remember before we left for break, you look at the amount of red area with no white specks. Well, you get a big red area right here with no white specks, and that has to do with the marbling, which has to do with the quality grade. So this steak right here is probably a low choice, a low select, okay? And those big ones don't equal any more than a small one, so this is probably also a low select. This one here is a prime for sure, and that looks delicious. It's in the morning, but that's making me hungry. Okay, same thing, probably a select again. And here we have probably a high choice, low prime. So you can see the difference in the cuts of meat. Okay, this is just for fun. This is not on your list, but a lot of times in restaurants or on TV, you see what's called a tomahawk cut or a tomahawk ribeye. Okay, and that's what this is. This is your ribeye steak right here, but this bone is just left long. So it looks kind of like a tomahawk. It's kind of a new thing. If you go to these fancy restaurants and barbecue joints, it's awesome. I mean, it just looks impressive. It's like Fred Flintstone kind of meat. Okay, so those are your rib cuts. All you have is a rib roast boneless, a ribeye steak boneless, and a ribeye steak lip on. There's only 4 cuts, so hopefully those are fairly simple for you. Okay, now we're going to get into this muscle right here, and this is the flank. The flank is one solid muscle, so we're only getting 1 cut, which means that we get 2 flank steaks off each animal. And if we look at a flank steak, okay, they almost look like big tongues. Now, this is probably about 12 to 14 inches lengthwise here, maybe sometimes even a little bit more, and probably about 8 inches or 9 inches wide. Okay, and the number one thing you got to know about a flank steak, and for some reason my notes aren't showing up here, but the grain of the meat runs the long way. Hopefully you can see that grain, and those are your long meat fibers, okay, and they run the long way. So when you cook this, and you can marinate this, there's not a lot of fat inside this, so you want to maybe liquid marinate it. Make sure you cut it the short direction, because that's against the grain, the opposite of the grain. That way each of these little meat fibers, okay, gets cut short, and you don't have to chew it as much. Okay, you can actually cut flank steak before you marinate it, and then that flavor gets all the way around each piece of meat and inside. Another flank, okay, kind of like a big tongue, and the thing is, know the grain of the meat is running the long way. It almost looks like a river flowing there, a red and white river flowing. And so, know those meat fibers run the long way, and you know it's a flank. Then we're just going to get up here into what we call the plate, or the short plate, and this is going to be the bottom section of the ribs. Okay, and so we look at this. This is our plate right in here, and we actually have a muscle that's hanging inside that fat right there that goes around the diaphragm of the animal and helps it in the diaphragm area. Okay, the skirt steak, it looks like a not very appetizing steak, but is actually very delicious, because this fat that is mixed in with the meat tastes more like marbling rather than external fat. This is stuff you'd see like with carne asada, fajitas in a Mexican restaurant, stuff like that. This is going to be a thin cut of meat, and you can see the grain of the meat is mixed with the fat the short direction. So flank steak was the long direction, skirt steak is the short direction. It looks like you can kind of wrap that around and you'd have a little mini skirt. Very good also, because when you have leftovers of this and you microwave it, that fat mixed in with the meat keeps it from getting dry. Another one there, not as fatty, but you can see the grain of the meat going the short direction. Okay, and it's about 4.5 inches wide this way, and the whole thing will be about 12 to 14 inches long. Another look at it, kind of looks like octopus, but it's not. It's just kind of rolled up. Okay. And then the last cut we're going to take, short ribs. So these now are the bottom of those ribs. They got little rib bones in them. You can see that dark marrow area, bone marrow. Okay, you see the bone right there. And then you have layers of meat and fat. And they're always going to be cut in short cubes or large cubes. But these are short ribs. These are going to be typically cooked maybe in a crock pot for long periods of time, because this is actually fairly tough meat, and you have to cook it down. You got layers of fat and tissue, and you got to cook it down long enough that those layers of fat and tissue start to render down, so that your meat will actually be let go, and you can actually eat it. And it is tender. Easy, simple way to do this is just throw this in a crock pot at the beginning of the day with a bottle of cheap barbecue sauce on top of it, and let it cook all day, and then it's ready to go for dinner. And it actually is very good meat once it cooks long enough and renders down. But you can see there's our rib bone right there, rib bone right there, okay, and rib bone right there. And then you got the layers mixed together of fat and meat. Okay. So that is all we have this week for the rib. You got 4 cuts of rib, you got a flank, and you got 2 cuts out of the plate, being the short rib and the skirt steak. So next quiz will be on Friday, which will be over all of them. That moves us up to 27 cuts, and we will have some reviews both on Kia and on Quizlet to help you study for this quiz. So good luck, and hope you are getting along well.